I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be continuing our analysis of the acting categories, jumping into the Best Supporting Actor predictions. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is pick a different Oscar nominations category, predict what I think is going to win, and we do that for every category leading up into the Oscar nominations, and then of course predict the Oscars once they happen as well. But we do more than that too. As we start to get more and more into the award season, we're starting to build, the momentum is happening. We're going to focus on Critics' Choice and Golden Globes and give my predictions, reactions, and SAG. And just generally, this is the sort of center that you want to be on YouTube for all the award season necessary content. We upload once a week, but as we get closer into the award season, I will be uploading multiple times a week just to keep you guys updated and to give my thoughts and analysis on breaking events. But as always, appreciate it if you would comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the Best Supporting Actor category, what your predictions are, because ultimately what we want to build here is a great Oscars community where we can all discuss and talk about what we think is going to get nominated. And my job is to break down the information, give a little personal opinion, and try to break down the race to help you with your Oscar nominations. But jumping into things, my first pick is going to be Brendan Gleeson from the Banshees of Inisherin. Now, while I'm not 100% confident he's going to win right now, I do think that he's going to get nominated for sure. And ultimately, when I do my rankings, it's always usually in likelihood that they'll get nominated. And I have Gleeson in here because when I look at the Best Supporting Actor category, I look for two things. I look for, is your movie nominated for Best Picture? And are you an established sort of veteran actor? That's a sort of typical path for a Best Supporting Actor winner or nominee. So first of all, Banshees of Inisherin, I think that's going to get nominated for Best Picture. Could even get in for Director, multiple acting nominations, Screenplay. I think it's a strong film that will be well appreciated within the Academy, so that's good. And the reason why I say Best Picture in particular is because, well, obviously if it gets nominated for Best Picture, it's clearly well liked. However, this category, more than any other of the acting categories, is intimately tied to Best Picture in particular. Last week we talked about Best Supporting Actress, which is very well tied to Best Picture, but this one has an even stronger average. An average of 3.6 out of the 5 nominees for the past 5 years have had their movie nominated for Best Picture, which makes sense. Oftentimes the winner is nominated for Best Picture because if you like the performance, you probably like the movie as well. So, and sometimes in the lead actress or actor categories, we'll have, Renee Zellweger win for Judy, and then Judy have, other nominations. Or even last year, Isa Tammy Faye win for makeup and Jessica Chastain, but have no other nominations. But in the supporting categories, particularly supporting actor, having a Best Picture nominee is really crucial to your chances of getting a nomination. So that really helps Brendan there. And then on the other side, we've seen these sort of established character actors like Brendan Gleeson not only get nominated, but win in the past. I'm thinking of someone like a J.K. Simmons would be a classic example. Or before Whiplash, you were like, oh yeah, that guy from Burn After Reading, or, the guy from Spider-Man. I know him. Oh yeah, he's always good. I think Brendan Gleeson occupies a similar sort of realm where you go, oh yeah, he was in Harry Potter, right? Oh, and in Bruges, big fan of that. Started off in Braveheart. He's just been one of those guys now for 20 years who is very much a character actor who a lot of people, I think, recognize, even if they may not know his name, although, of course, movie fans like us do know him and have been appreciative of him for years. And, he's a great average actor. And I do think that he's kind of an actor that has paid his dues in the sense like a J.K. Simmons of he's been in great movies for so many years in these sort of small parts, gets a really sort of interesting, juicy role here, once again in a Martin McDonagh film, and I think he really hits it out of the park and nails the performance, and I think a lot of people will feel similarly. That being said, the reason why I'm not convinced he's going to win right now is just because he doesn't have a traditional Oscar speech. Oftentimes when we're looking at these performances, it is noticeably, wow, that's powerful, wow, that's a great performance. The strength of his performance is less so with his speaking and more so towards his presence and his aura and the way he carries himself versus, say, his speeches or his tone. So that's something that's maybe a little bit more unconventional for a winner, but in terms of a nomination, established character actor in a really solid role, like he has a lot of screen time and is a central part of the role, but is still a Best Supporting Actor contender, I think. I don't think it's category fraud necessarily. So I think the movies could be strong, and I think they'll like Brendan to give him his first nomination. Then with my second pick, I'm going to go with Quan from Everything Everywhere All at Once. And a lot of the points that apply to Brendan Gleeson apply here as well. I mean, you have an established actor who's been acting technically, since the 80s, who's in a movie that I think is going to be a strong contender for Best Picture. So why do I have him a little bit lower? Well, just because, unlike Brendan Gleeson, Quan was mostly known as a child actor, starring Indiana Jones and the Goonies in the 80s, but then not really working until now, and sort of having this big comeback in mainstream sort of kind of Hollywood movies. Even though this is still independent A24, it is still sort of a comeback into English language kind of mainstream films. So I think there's a strong narrative there, a strong story, where the path to win being that sort of narrative, hey, we really like Everything Everywhere All at Once. If it's going to win Best Picture, it will need this win, I think, along with something like Best Original Screenplay, and that's a very traditional path. Look at Coda last year, followed a similar trajectory, screenplay, supporting actor, and then picture. So, if Everything Everywhere All at Once is a strong contender, it needs to win here. And the narrative just being that, hey, this was this kid that we all liked in the 80s, he's coming back into Hollywood. It's this great performance. He gives a lot of these sort of emotional speeches, many emotional speeches. Of course, the performance in itself is very complex in that, he's playing essentially two types of people. The sort of timid laundromat owner versus the sort of ultra badass, time-jumping kind of a assassin guy that he's playing. So he has that complexity there. So there's a great performance in of itself with a strong movie. Plus, you have that sort of narrative campaign. There's a lot of things going towards him. My concern is that, for me, it can either go two ways. It can go something like Troy Kotsur last year, sort of that path where he's so great in the movie's so sort of heartwarming and well appreciated, and he's so great in it, and seemingly, a very lovable real-life personality. So there's just that element of, we just feel so good watching this movie. We feel good, nominate him. We want to do that there. That could be the situation. Or the situation is, the nomination is his win. That he doesn't necessarily need to win. It's just the fact that, hey, he was in the movies as a kid, he's come back now, give him a nomination. That's our celebratory sort of success for him, but we'll give it to the established actor and someone like a Brendan Gleeson. Hard to tell where it's going to go right now, but Quan is a strong number 2 and could potentially even win. Then my third nomination, I'm going to go with Judd Hirsch from The Fabelmans. Now, I think a lot of people early on, even including myself, thought Paul Dano, maybe out of The Fabelmans, could be a strong contender. But he has since exited my rankings because I think that Judd Hirsch has much more of the typical role for this kind of nomination. I mean, just getting Paul Dano out of the way first. When we first heard about The Fabelmans, the big sort of revelation, I think, was Steven Spielberg. He's done it again. What a great film. But particularly Michelle Williams, how great Michelle Williams is, which I think in a certain way sort of negates someone like a Paul Dano, where Michelle Williams is so great and he's good too, but she's sort of made more of the star of the show. And then also, Paul Dano, just his type. I haven't seen The Fabelmans, but based on the reviews and, of course, knowing many of Dano's films, you think of something like There Will Be Blood. That got nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, strong Oscar movie. He didn't get nominated. You think of Little Miss Sunshine. That was a big Oscar movie, right? He didn't get nominated. He's always a great actor and has been a great actor, but because of his more sort of reserved, timid, kind of a quieter performance style, he doesn't have as maybe showy of a role, particularly seems like in The Fabelmans as well. So I think he'll be sort of taken to the backseat, almost taken for granted, and because he doesn't have that big showy role, which oftentimes the supporting actor category appreciates, because he doesn't have that, I think there's going to be a lack of a nomination. But we're not talking about Dano, we're talking about Hirsch. So I want to talk about Judd Hirsch, who was a past nominee, all the way back in the 80s for Ordinary People. Now sort of maybe it would be sort of, in a narrative sense, cute for the Academy to nominate him again as sort of one final performance here. And his performance is a one-scene performance. It quite literally is like this interlude. He's not part of the story in any other way, but from all the reviews, based on what they say, it's very sort of charming, it's very memorable, and he sort of does linger throughout the rest of the film. And we kind of have seen this in whether it be Rachel Weisz for The Constant Gardener, or Mahershala Ali for Moonlight, in which these winners, or even someone like a Sam Rockwell in Vice, sort of these 1-2 scene type performances, they have a real big impact and then they linger throughout the film. So if that's the kind of performance, even if it's literally just one scene, we have seen this sort of memorable one-scene performance get nominated in the 4. Plus, you have the fact that it's The Fabelmans, the current frontrunner to win for Best Picture, so you want to see that movie get nominated for somewhere. I don't have Dano just because I think it's a little bit more of a quiet, reserved performance, but I have Hirsch because he's a past nominee, because there's a strong narrative, I think, of, hey, it would be fun to sort of nominate him one last time. He's getting up there in age now. And then I also think this sort of one-scene performance that's memorable and funny. And if you think about that performance when you leave The Fabelmans, and hey, you like The Fabelmans, and hey, you like Judd Hirsch, a lot of things sort of combined together that I think he has a strong chance to get nominated here. Then I have Eddie Redmayne in The Good Nurse in my 4th slot, which for a lot of people is a sort of long shot, but I think is actually a really strong long shot to bet on. And I think it actually can have a very strong chance of getting nominated here because, as I mentioned, this category is intimately tied with Best Picture, right? But the average was 3.6 out of 5, which means that most of the time, most of the nominees are nominated for Best Picture as well. But that doesn't mean all the time. As a matter of fact, if you look at the past 5 years, in none of those years were there a perfect 5 out of 5 of the nominees that had a movie nominated for Best Picture. So it wasn't like, we would have 5 out of 5. All the Best Supporting Actor nominees also had their film nominated for Best Picture. It was the majority, 4 out of 5s, 3 out of 5s, but never 5 out of 5. So what that tells me is that, yes, they like to nominate people in the movies they like, but they also like to nominate sort of these one-off-ball kind of performances. So you can sort of look at it 2 ways. One, most of your predictions, I think, should be 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5, should be movies that also get nominated for Best Picture. But maybe don't go 5 for 5. That hasn't happened for the past 5 years. So maybe you want to insert a person like Eddie Redmayne in The Good Nurse. So I actually think this helps, the fact that right now all my predictions are from people who I predicted a movie will get nominated for Best Picture, but except for Eddie Redmayne. So it sort of makes sense and holistic in that sense. So that's what I think I wanted to consider, and I think you should consider as well. And then what about the film itself? It has sort of mediocre reviews, which is why I don't think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture, but it's being campaigned by Netflix, so there's a strong benefit there. Eddie Redmayne is a noted, well-campaigner. I mean, he's a 2-time nominee, past winner. He's someone who's known to go to these parties and campaign and be very charming and get himself that nomination. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does so again here, and playing a role in which it is sort of, playing this guy who has a sketchy backstory, who in this hospital finds out that there's these patients that are dying from increases in insulin. Jessica Chastain is sort of the audience surrogate, and he's sort of icy and cold and sometimes friendly, but sometimes strange. We're not exactly sure what to feel about him, but it's a very sort of complex role, and I think Eddie does so very well in playing that. And The Good Nurse is being very well seen, number 1 on Netflix across the world. It's doing very well there in a sort of time that people are considering for awards. It played at the festivals, it played in England at the BFI, it played at Toronto where it premiered, so it's in that sort of festival conversation as a movie. Maybe not best enough to get a Best Picture nomination, but with a really strong sort of role here, it could be in contention. I think of it similarly to someone like Jared Leto, when he sort of got that buzz for The Little Things. He almost got nominated for that performance, even though the film was sort of a mixed response. And for me, the big thing that I try to think of when making my predictions now is what's going to happen in the future, and what's going to happen in the future, will that affect what's going to happen eventually at the end? Of course it will. So what you have to figure out is, well, do you have Eddie Redmayne as a potential SAG nomination? I do. I think this is a very sort of flashy performance. I think this is a movie that's being seen by a lot of people. The Screen Actors Guild SAG, they're the biggest branch. They have a lot of members, not only just actors, but radio personalities. So a lot of their tastes are a little bit more mainstream. So I look at this mainstream, easily accessible, highly watched movie in The Good Nurse that played the festivals from a campaigner in Eddie Redmayne, who's established as being very good at that kind of stuff, so we can help him, schmooze his kind of a way into potential nomination in kind of a role that is a typical sort of evil-ish, don't know, understanding kind of a performer, a performance, in this kind of a film. So he's got a lot of things going for him. Even though The Good Nurse isn't going to be nominated for Best Picture, I actually think that helps in this case. And the more I think about it, the more I think, Eddie Redmayne, even though he's a long shot, 41 odds on Gold Derby, I think he has a really solid shot for a nomination. And of course, I'm predicting him here. Then in my final slot, I'm going to go with Ben Whishaw from Women Talking. And as I mentioned last week, I am a believer right now in Women Talking, in the sense that I think it's going to get in for picture and director, and potentially even win for adapted screenplay, and even potentially supporting actress. And that being said, I still have Ben Whishaw at my final slot here, because I'm unsure about his nomination, in part because Women Talking can go 2 different ways. It can sort of go a Ma Rainey's Black Bottom way, where it gets sort of nominations, but doesn't get in for sort of Best Director and kind of disappoints, or it could go the sort of favorite route, where it gets multiple acting nominations, director, picture, and is a very well-respected kind of a drama. But right now, I think Wishaw's nomination is backed by the sense that Women Talking will be a strong film. If Women Talking, doesn't get Whishaw, I think that slips potentially for Sarah Polley for director. I think its Best Picture chances decrease. I think there's sort of an intimate tie here with Whishaw's chances and Women Talking's chances as a whole, because when you think of the film, this is a strong ensemble of female actors. It's about the women in the film. Ben Whishaw is really the only man in the film, and he doesn't have much to do. I mean, his role isn't sort of this big and grandiose element. He's very, just taking minutes, taking notes at this meeting, because he can read and write. So he doesn't have a flashy performance. He's the only man in the film, so they don't, and the Oscars don't really owe him anything. It's not like he's this established veteran actor who's well respected. He's a newer actor, So I think he can easily get overlooked. He doesn't have this flashy role. Right now I have him in because I believe in the strength of Women Talking. But if he doesn't get in at a SAG or something like that, I think that hurts the chances of Women Talking. And I would be willing to sort of put in one of my sort of 6 or 7 slots because he doesn't have a strong real kind of performance. But ultimately, I have it in here, like I said, because I believe in the strength of Women Talking, and I believe he will ride that strength of Women Talking, of it being, an acting, directing, sort of screenplay showpiece. If it is a real strong contender and is campaigned appropriately, I think it can sort of help Whishaw sneak in there. But right now, I think he's a very vulnerable number 5, and depending on the day, I may have him sort of switched in or out. Then, in my possible contenders section here, my number 1 possible contender is Brad Pitt from Babylon. There's a lot of things going right for him. I mean, this is a recent winner in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, of course. Babylon, Damien Chazelle has had an Oscar winners in the past in J.K. Simmons and in Emma Stone. So well-liked actor in a movie, Babylon, that I do think will be a director, picture sort of acting contender. Brad Pitt plays essentially sort of a real-life proxy of John Gilbert, who was a silent movie star. So, the fact that if you look at my sort of nominations, it's pretty lacking in people playing real-life people, which of course the Academy loves. It doesn't happen where, the category goes by where that doesn't get nominated. A real-life person, an actor playing a real-life person. So I think that helps Pitt's chances. So you have a really well-liked actor playing essentially a real-life person in a movie that will get nominated for Best Picture and Director. Connor, why don't you have it in here? Well, for me, the big one is a question, a concern, and a big question mark. Of course, no one's seen the film. We don't know how much of a role Pitt has in it. And then, of course, there's sort of this public a case against him from Angelina Jolie and their sort of messy breakup and what he did or did not do on a flight. So there is some sort of public potentially damning things that have gone on. So I'm not sure if Paramount will really want to campaign Babylon. He's a producer of She Said and Women Talking, but on the Women Talking for Consideration page, he's not one of the producers that's in consideration for Best Picture. So Paramount may sort of follow suit and say, hey, the Paramount can either say, hey, this is maybe a non-issue, we're going to sort of campaign for Brad Pitt, or they're going to say, hey, we'll put you on our site, but we're really not going to push you very hard. Brad's not going to go into the public very often and do the campaigning. He's already won an Oscar. Does he really need another nomination? And maybe he'll just sort of fall to the wayside. But it does seem, based on the trailers and the type of a role that it is, real-life person, he does have this sort of outsized, larger-than-life, great kind of a performance in a movie that I do think is going to get nominated for Best Picture. The big question is whether or not people will sort of sweep that Angelina Jolie thing under the rug or maybe make that a talking point. Hard to say right now, but it is an absolute question from a potential nominee to being sort of right down on the outside and sort of shushed away. Hard to see what's going to happen. Then my final possible contender, I'm going to go with Barry Keoghan from the Banshees of Inisherin. The one thing that's sort of holding me back from this is that I have Kerry Condon in, I have Brendan Gleeson in, I have Colin Farrell in. Do I really want to put Barry Keoghan in? Do I really think Banshees of Inisherin is a strong enough film that's going to get 4 acting nominations? Right now, I don't. I think it's a strong film. I don't know if it's strong enough to get 4 acting nominations. That's significant. But that being said, he's got a lot going for him. It's a great acting showcase. Everyone's good in it. Strong script, Best Picture contender. Barry Keoghan is sort of an interesting upcoming actor who's been in, these prestige kind of awards related kind of films like The Green Knight or The Killing of a Sacred Deer. And his performance is very engineered in many ways to get him a nomination, in the sense that it's a sympathetic performance. He's a little bit less of a bright person, kind of a sporadic kind of a character, but very sympathetic, trying to be friends with Colin Farrell, even though Colin doesn't really want to be him, but then also clearly in love with his sister. And then, of course, the sort of result of his character and that heartbreak that he feels is very sort of a strong emotional core within the film. So I think if you like the film, which I do think people will, you will consider him and he will get some votes. My concern is that it's kind of rare that we see multiple acting nominations from the same film. So like, I think, like I talked about last week, Claire Foy and Jessie Buckley will get nominated in supporting actress for the same film, The Woman Talking. Will that happen in supporting actor too? It could, but it's more rare. You know, that's the thing that only happens in one category once a year versus happening all the time. So that's something we want to consider as well, and why he's, you know, definite possible contender, definite contender to get nominated. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it come SAG and Banshees wins for ensemble, and it's like a big kind of a deal. I do think that he can sort of sneak in, but right now it's just super rare for a film to get 4 acting nominations. And I think the other 3 are much stronger in Keoghan and Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, at least in terms of getting a nomination. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Best Supporting Actor. I'd love to hear it. This is still a very wide open category. I have some of my long shots, like Eddie Redmayne. What do you think about Ben Whishaw? I mean, maybe a little bit too low on it. Do you have Paul Danowin? All that kind of stuff. I'd love to hear. Please comment below and share the video with your friends so we can build this great Oscar community. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.